Hello, everybody. This is Oleg Moskalansky here. Usually I do these weekly hangouts where I just do it solo and talk about different tools and tips and techniques and situations dealing with a little bit of programming, things like that. But today we have a very special guest. So you're not going to see any screen shares today. It's just going to be me and Mr. Ammon Johns. Hello, Ammon.
Hi, good to be here.
Excellent to have you here. It's my first hangout with Ammon in terms of actually doing it here, and I'm extremely happy and honored by such. I've been a big fan of Ammon Johns for a long time, watching his hangouts, and basically me being an IT person, I don't, even though I know some things about marketing, I try to educate myself. It's absolute privilege to listen to people like Ammon discuss these things and learn from him. And so right now, anytime he goes into a hangout, I usually try to either catch it after the fact or actually watch it live. So Ammon, I'm a huge fan. Just wanted you to know.
That's good to know. Yeah, you and my mum, I think that's about...
Well, see, it's more than just your mom now, so that's good and stuff. So it's seriously, it's a like I said, it's a privilege to have you join me. And today we're gonna discuss Ammon. By the way, for those that don't know him, which can't imagine too many people don't know him, but is a serious long-time marketing professional. Ammon, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong here. And he's been doing marketing for businesses for, please fill in the blank, Ammon.
20 years, yeah. So
20 years. So some of you in the audience may not even be old enough, considering in comparison to how many years Ammon has been doing marketing. And so clearly, when you listen to his hangouts and you watch his posts, you can see that the gentleman knows tremendous amount of information about marketing, the proper way to do it. He's got an excellent series going with Vincent Messina on the topic of marketing, which I find to be not only extremely educational and useful, but at the same time, even entertaining at places too. Ammon is always entertaining, that's for sure. So anyway, so today we're going to talk about websites, and just to kind of set up the stage here, before I give Ammon his introduction, is I come from a background in information technology, and of course, information technology people got totally mixed, if you will, into the whole web thing, into the whole internet thing right from the beginning, because it's part of information technology, internet and web design, websites. It's all part of the whole computer kind of experience, information technology experience, if you will. And so us people who used to design systems for businesses and write code, write different business systems, we wound up being kind of pushed into it in a way, or sucked into it, I should say, not necessarily because we wanted to, but this is the thing that was coming, and the people in data processing, as they used to call it, now they call it information technology, got sucked into it to participate and do things in that realm as well. And of course, the whole web thing exploded big time with all these websites and web pages. And initially, it was kind of a strange situation because people didn't really know exactly what to do and what to make of it. I mean, yeah, you have a page and you have links, but I mean, what do you do with this stuff? And this is where people like Ammon, who are marketing professionals, come in saying, wait a minute now. We got tons of people looking at these things, and more so every day. This is a perfect way to use this for marketing purposes, because if you think about it, if you think of traditional models of advertising and promoting things, you have your piece of paper, it's 8.5 by 11 sheet in a magazine, and A, it's expensive, and B, it's something that is only 8.5 by 11 inches, and there's only so much information you can put on it. And here you go with this web stuff where you have pages of literally any size at all. I mean, you can put as much information as you want. And then, of course, we advance from just regular hypertext, which is just basically nothing but text with links to go to some other pages or some other places in the same page. Then you got into the whole rich media thing. You got videos, you got imagery, all kinds of different things, animations. And so people in marketing, and at least this is my view on it, and like I said, we'll get Ammon here to chime in with his wisdom on the subject, really took the initiative to say we can make this to be a major marketing tool for businesses, because we can bring our marketing know-how, and then we can use these IT characters that don't know squat about marketing, how to have them build this thing for us, and then the synergy of the two comes out with positive results, and people like it, people use it, and so on and so forth. Of course, the web itself was pretty easy to use. You simply point and click and scroll. I mean, there's not much to it in terms of people learning how to do it. So it kind of became a thing where a lot of people took the bull by the horn, so to speak, and started really using the web for a lot of marketing efforts. And there was, a lot of people used it in not so ethical manner. And so there was a lot of angst generated from people who were basically swindled. So that's also certainly part of the mix. But we're not going to concentrate on that at all. We're just going to concentrate on the positive aspects of it. And so, again, going back to a little bit of history, everything started out with just having a page on the screen, which they call web page, and it has some text, and it has some images, and it has some links, and now it has some videos. And that moved into in terms of what actual content goes on there. This is where I'd like Ammon to come in and say a few words about that particular aspect of it, in terms of the marketing getting in to the mixing in with the web.
It's one of those really fascinating things. Now, my interest in the internet was peaked because it's one of those inventions. People talk about inventions like, oh, the wheel, sliced bread, the best thing since sliced bread, the best thing since the wheel. Nonsense. The best invention in all of history was the printing press. And the reason for that is that's where the idea of mass education got its roots. It wasn't until they had the printing press that they could produce reading material en masse that there was any need for people to read. Before the printing press, it could take 5 years to write a book, because literally every page was handwritten and then it was bound. And there weren't copies of this. That was one book. It got passed around. It was an absolute treasure. If you owned 3 books, you were a library. And it was an incredible treasure. So into that world, along comes the printing press. And suddenly, everyone is able to see books. There is the ability for every church to easily have Bibles, which was, of course, one of the first places it did get used. And then the printers have supplied all the churches, and they've supplied all the temples, they've supplied all the synagogues. Everybody's got those books. Now, you've just supplied everybody in the world that can read. And so what's the next step? Well, actually, isn't it kind of your religious duty to be able to read the words of God yourself? So that was the next thing. And the very first public education were the Sunday schools. So everything that is to do with education, everything to do with the scientists of today, let's face it, Einstein was not born to a very wealthy family. He would not have had an education. He wouldn't have had the education to have done all his work. Stephen Hawking, 1,000 other scientists would not have been educated were it not for the invention of the printing press. Now take that a step further. Printing press was quite expensive. To get a book published, to have your words out there where they can be shared and read by people you haven't even met, is intensive. The internet makes it instant and free for you to publish, and for your words to go far beyond you, for you to have half an idea and write an article, and somebody halfway around the world to join the dots with the other half of the idea that they've got and they've been playing with for a while, and suddenly a new invention is born. That is incredibly powerful. And that was just in the text form. In the years since, in which we've got more bandwidth and we can now have streaming video like this, it's absolutely incredible. Think about what we're doing here, how expensive a television studio is. what was involved in broadcasting, and now we've all got it for free. YouTube is incredible. The lessons, the tips, the instructional videos that you can access or create are endless. And this is absolutely the most powerful invention. So if anybody asks you in future, you know, what's the greatest invention of all time, you're probably looking at it right now, the internet.
No question about that. I mean, totally 100% agree on that. But in terms of business use, in terms of using, people came up with web pages and initial, I'm just going to steer it back a little bit to the business side of it. Initially, it was all about what became known as brochureware. In other words, you have essentially a web-based, the flyer that you normally would print to put in your office so people can take it and you had some information, or any kind of other printed materials. Essential that transferred to the web, so you had a web page, or you have a website, which is nothing more than a collection of web pages that are somehow interlinked between each other, so you can navigate to each one. And it had the information on it, and it was like a brochure. And so there's a tremendous amount of websites that got built and still are around. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that particular concept. And so for a while, most of the web was nothing but these interlinked web pages that in some cases were a collection of pages that would make a website that had static information that would not change. And then eventually we moved into the different realm, which was ability to make web pages intelligent. I mean, I don't know how else to describe it. That's basically, it's a simple definition, but it's exactly what it is.
Well,
And then,
the first step was the dynamic website, or it's pulled from a database. And
right.
I wouldn't necessarily call it intelligent, but it's easier to manage. So the content management system was kind of the next step up from the static web page.
Right, but that still was pretty much brochureware. It's a different way to get the information there, but it's still brochureware because it's dynamic from the standpoint that it's being pulled from a database, and you can go and make some changes in the database and the website would change. But it really wasn't that smart in terms of, I guess what I'm trying to say is that in the business systems that we developed, for business use inside the businesses, we always had computer systems that handled tracking information. I mean, if you kind of try to get the basic strategy of what an IT or computer system for business is, if you really kind of move it into real abstract world, the easiest way to describe it is you have a process that either includes collecting information, storing that information, retrieving that information, and then reporting on that information. That's pretty much the main definition of just about every computer system that's out there that was used by businesses. And these computer systems were very much localized. There were systems that were running on computers, usually inside the businesses. They were not located anywhere else. It was very difficult in the old days to connect various, if you even had multiple affiliates of the same company in multiple places, it was very difficult to get them connected. I mean, I remember when I used to work in the corporate world, we had, it was a timeshare company, resort company, and they had a number of resorts throughout the Western United States, a little bit in Canada and in Mexico. And so at one point, I was tasked with basically a project to go and install communication capability so we can transfer some files and get some information back and forth between us and our Mexican location. And it was a nightmare because I show up at the place, and I was supposed to spend a week there installing a new accounting system, and then we're supposed to get the information back to the main office, which was in Bellevue, Washington here. And I show up, and it's a room kind of in the outside little building, and I walk in with all my gear, and number one, I don't speak any Spanish, which was definitely a challenge in Mexico. Number two, there is basically a window, there is a door, and there is absolutely nothing else in this room. There is no power, there's no there wasn't even any kind of light or anything. You could, you had to bring your own lamp in there if you had electricity to plug it into there, which I didn't. and there was no telephone line either. So it's one of these deals where, if you want to hear the funny part about what happened here, is I started screaming bloody murder in English because that's the only language other than Russian that I knew, and the resort's manager's secretary, who was my English at the time, she was my translator because she spoke both English and Spanish. She understood the problem. She said, "Let me see what I can do." The next morning, she actually brings a gentleman from the phone company by going to his house, mind you, not to the business, to the house, at 6 a.m. in the morning, getting him out of bed, giving him sufficient amount of cash to, incentivize him so he can come. And then by the end of the day, I had my one plugin for the computer, and I also had my telephone line being extended. Very ugly looking telephone line, but it was a working telephone line. So to make a long story short, is communication used to be extremely difficult between locations. So all these systems were usually running on computers within the company somewhere. And then, there would be kind of either it was a mainframe environment, meaning there was a one major computer and you had all these different tubes connected through the cables to it, which are just what they call dumb terminals, meaning it's basically a monitor and a keyboard and not much of anything else, doesn't have any brain to it. Or later there were distributed systems where you had actual smart computers that people were interconnected but still within the same company. And so, without going to all the minutiae and all the details here, the bottom line here is that when people invented the web and tied it to the internet, and it started to become kind of a mainstream approach here, because the internet itself is pretty old. I mean, it was invented back in the immediately post World War II time, during the beginning of Cold War, as a way to communicate after the nuclear Armageddon. That was the reason the government actually invented the internet. It wasn't Al Gore at all, but it was invented by the government, by the DARPA agency.
Yeah.
And that was the purpose for it. And then nobody used it for a long time in terms of anything but the military. And then they gave it to the universities, and then the universities picked it up and they started doing emails, things like that, which regular folks didn't use. So you have all these students that are able to participate in this distributed computing, if you will, with all these kind of rudimentary programs. But when the thing really exploded was when Tim Berners-Lee in Switzerland invented the web, the World Wide Web, with these little hyperlink pages. That's when the thing fairly quickly exploded into what we have today. And that's because
we had a brief explosion just before that, of course, with IRC, with Internet Relay Chat,
right,
which just predates the World Wide Web as such, and bulletin boards, of course,
exactly,
were quite popular.
yes, right.
But when the web came along, that made publishing a lasting document much easier, rather than just leaving a note on somebody's bulletin board or the live interaction of chat. But there was e-commerce on both of those.
Right, right. People always try to capitalize.
FTP servers where you could, buy documents, and of course, people ran servers through IRC where you could connect through their clients, even passing credit card details, and transactions were done that way.
Right. Initially, there were these services like CompuServe and Genie from GE, and then the big one that took over all of those was AOL. That was kind of the first big internet service provider that a lot of people started using, and then eventually, eventually it moved into what we have today. But as Ammon pointed out, exactly, initially there was this telecommunication piece with using modems to connect and send information, and certainly a lot of people used it for a lot of different purposes. I at one point wrote a system to run a cable TV channel on the old Commodore Amiga computers, and I actually put together a communication module that would accept information from local schools and fire departments, and it would automatically build in the background these screens with special backgrounds and this information that the schools would send, and it would show to people on their televisions on one of their channels. So the communication part was handled by this Z modem protocol, as they called it at the time, sending using regular modems. I mean, internet was there, but nobody used it yet in terms of mass and mass scale like they do now. And then when the whole World Wide Web came over, then people started having some thoughts about this is just beyond cool. I mean, I remember talking to my boss at one point after the whole web started, and it became used by a lot of people. This is back in probably like early 90s or so, because the web started in 1985, I think. And I said this would be so cool to be able to have applications written so you can just run them in the browser. And I remember she looked at me like I was from Mars or something, thinking that A, this is never going to happen, and B, what would be the use of that? I mean, why would you want? I mean, what's wrong with what we're doing now with our terminals and our 24 lines and our 80 characters and things like that? My other boss at one point, when I was playing around with my Amigas, which were phenomenal computers, way ahead of their time, was telling me one time, who in business would ever need color, or who would need any kind of multitasking or sound or anything? It's just nobody would ever use anything like that. And so this was a gentleman who was actually very astute when it came to IT, but it shows you how far ahead of time some of these inventions were, and how people were kind of looking at them in a totally different light compared to what it is now. And then, of course, we advanced to now. So the conversation, I guess, right now, what I want to talk about is this whole explosion of the web in terms of using it. Partially, I think it's exploded because it's so simple for people to use. Partially, it's because it became so inexpensive. I mean, you still, like Ammon said, it is free, but not exactly free. You still need to have an internet provider account. I mean, you need to be able to get on the internet, and that's not free, even though they have some services you can get for free. But usually people pay for, especially if you have broadband, you have to pay something for it. But in terms of past the basic access fee, which is pretty minimal, and pretty much anybody can afford, you have access to just unbelievable amount, really bad and extremely good information. So people started putting one of the things that, and the reason I bring up so many examples of myself, not trying to put myself on a pedestal here, but it makes sense in terms of how it kind of evolved, is I remember myself looking at these systems we were developing internally, accounting systems, budget systems, contract systems, reservation systems. We had all these different systems running on our local computers. And the upshot of that was that the customer was not able to get to any of this information short of picking up the phone and calling us. And one day I was thinking, when the web thing started, we kind of put together this rudimentary website, I was totally fascinated by the concept. I mean, I was just like a little kid. After 20 plus years in IT, writing and designing all these systems, all of a sudden it's like new playground. And I was like, oh my God, there's so many cool things you can do here. And this is even before JavaScript and all of that kind of stuff that people do now. And so one of the things in our timeshare situation was that people, pick up the phone, they make a call, and they want to go on vacation in one of our 30-some resorts. And the person on the other, I mean, if you just think about the transaction, the husband talks to the wife. They figure out they're going to go on April 15th to Mexico, and they're going to take the kids, and everything is set, and they're ready to call and get the tickets, make the reservations. The guy calls up, and the reservationist politely tells him, "I'm sorry, we don't have any openings on the 15th. We don't have availability." So then the guy has to go back to home. He has to talk to the wife. He has to talk to the boss again to try to get a new date. And then he comes back and says, "Okay, how about if we go on April 25th?" And the lady responds, "I'm sorry, we don't have any openings on April 25th. So then the guy says, "Well, when do you have openings?" She says, "We have it on May 5th. So the guy again has to go back and talk to the wife and talk to the boss, who says, "No, no, 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 no. May 5th is when our auditors come. We can't do it." So you can see in my example, I'm a little bit exaggerating here, but mostly it's basically a very dysfunctional, what I call working in the blind mode. And so I put together a deal where I simply took our legacy data, meaning data from our existing systems, and I simply created an automated process. Not simply, I mean, it was relatively simple, but at the same time, nobody wanted to do it. And I had to do it on my own time on the weekend because I couldn't get authorization to get it done. So I go ahead and write this interface that basically takes the data from our main systems and simply FTPs or transfer this data to the web as web pages. And next thing you know, and all it showed was information about availability, which resort has how many units open on any particular night. You couldn't book a reservation or anything like that, but you could see it now. In other words, you don't have to be going back and forth making phone calls. You just sit down with your wife and you look at the calendar. I mean, not the calendar, but display on the screen from your web browser in the comfort of your home. And you can see exactly what the availability is for this particular resort, from day one to the end of the month. And it would show it for a few months forward. Then you pick up the phone and call, and you say, I see you have openings, you have a bunch of nights open this week. That's what we want to book. Long story short, even though the management didn't see the light at the time, once they got it up and running, we had a tremendous, like a little explosion in terms of registrations for the web use from the owners of the company, not owners, I mean the customers. And one lady actually wrote an email saying this is the best thing this company has done in the last 20 years, which definitely made my day. And so this is an example of how the web kind of not only exploded, but I mean, this is one of the reasons why it exploded is because the ease and flexibility of what you can present to people in the comfort of their own home and office, practically ubiquitously from anywhere, as long as the person is logged into their computer, they can see it. Your take, Ammon?
Yeah, it's an interesting development because, of course, at first it was only us. Let's use the general term geeks. It was only us geeks who were comfortable at a computer, and a lot of the other early users were kind of like the keyboard might bite them at any moment. You know, it's very much the one finger typing away. Bill Slosky in our audience has just said that his phone today is a better computer than his first computer was, and he's absolutely right. I mean, your smartphone today, I love the Amiga, I love the Atari. You know, I had a 1200 AT, and lovely machine, way ahead of its time. But yeah, your average smartphone kicks the hell out of anything it was capable of doing, including the color depth. You know, the display is better.
Right.
So we've come a long way. Part of it was that gradual adoption and those early years. You know, the internet was available to everybody from the 80s. Before that, it was kind of universities only, but it opened up throughout the 80s. Domain registration at one time was completely free. You didn't pay for a domain, you just asked for one. It wasn't until the 90s that domain registration actually cost anything.
Mm-hmm.
The 90s were kind of interesting, and the late 90s, after 96, was kind of when most people started to adopt it. And from that point on, it grew and grew every single year. Now, me, I was working shift work at that time. When I first started getting into the internet, I had a shift job, and when I got home from work, television in the UK at that time, we only had 4 channels, and most of them were turned off at night. You know, we got to a certain point at night, television stopped. There was one channel, our first all-night channel was around. The computer gave me a way of connecting and doing interesting things, playing games, if nothing else, throughout the night. But then I got interested in the web and the possibilities of this. And as I started to develop websites for myself, and then it was a few friends, and then it was friends of friends and businesses of friends of friends. And that's kind of where I first got started. But it was one of those things, already people were starting to market this. We still didn't have, you paid for your internet time as a telephone call back then. And we were so jealous of the US, where you could get, you know, a package that included unlimited time, because here in the UK we couldn't get that, and there's still a few countries today where you don't get that even today, or you've got very limited bandwidth over the, you know, data transfer over the course of a month. We had to keep everything very brief, so a lot of web development back then was even stricter than mobile development today. In fact, I think most mobile developers today could really do with a history lesson to learn how to really optimize their pages, get those data transfer sizes down. I have raved in the past about this new responsive design, where you kind of, it's supposed to be mobile first, but what happens is people build the biggest site for the biggest device and then try and chop bits out, have bits that won't show for mobile devices, which is entirely the wrong way to go about it. It just isn't the right way, because you tend to have more code than is going to display on the device that transfers the data the slowest and costs the most to download that data. So making them download extra data they can't even use is kind of like two slaps in the face at once. Where it got interesting is that it got to be where your kids could look at stuff, get information, and suddenly the main excuse for people getting the internet became so that my kids will be able to do their homework, or so that my children will have more opportunity. And the internet was hugely adopted, sort of 95, on the excuse of it being children. Let's face it, a lot of people actually wanted to download free software or browse certain other kinds of, but the excuse given to their wives was, you know, oh, for the kids. And a lot of people did get it for exactly that reason. There were a lot of people who almost treated the computer as another games console. It was primarily for the kids, and the dad would entertain himself when he could work out how to use it. We've come a long way, and our expectations of the web have come a long way too. There was a time when people weren't sure what a link was or how to use it. You know, people would underline a lot of text on a page because they were used to doing it in print, and people would be trying to click like mad. When Google first came out, the page was very, very simple. It just had the search box. And because of the slow data transfers of the time and the way that most sites were built at the time, people would sit there just staring at the page, waiting for it to finish loading. And this is when Google first added a little copyright to the bottom of their front page. Even though there was nothing on there that was actually copyrighted, there was no copy. It was just a search box.
Mm-hmm.
But they needed to add it so that people understood the page had finished loading. Yes, you've got all of it. That's it. That's all there is. Because they were so used to portals at the time. One thing that Bill, who's in the audience there, and I used to do in the web forums was talk about accessibility and usability, where we were looking at those transitioning people, moving from print to the web, those people just getting started, and talking about standards and protocols beyond the computer ones. What made the web possible was that there was a set of rules that says, if you write your document this way, every device will know how to display that. If you put this tag that says this is a heading, it will be displayed as a heading. If you put this meta tag that says it's a title, that will go up in the title bar. All of those kind of things, those protocols, those ways of translating information were there. But we still needed more than that. We needed customs and ways of giving familiarity to the users. And a large part of that has been in usability and accessibility. And there's so much we take for granted now that we're able to be more creative. We're able to do things that are unexpected. Whereas back then, if you did something unexpected, people just thought they'd broken something. And I think that's been fascinating. Where
it's yeah. Go ahead.
What, of course, was, you know, one of the very first sites that needed to do this really dynamic stuff was, of course, the search engines themselves, because the internet grew at such a pace that, yeah, the first kind of websites that were around, Yahoo, the Yahoo directory, pinnacle in its time, because it listed websites, but it had to do them by hand. Somebody hand wrote all of the pages.
Right.
And when the first search engines came along, when you started to get the Web Wombat, Infoseek,
Alta Vista,
Archie, when you got these early search engines that enabled you to kind of look where nobody had been, just a spider had gone out and found these pages and indexed it itself, that was where we really started to see web applications taking over and translating that data from raw data into web pages.
Right. And this is the next thing. This is a great segue into the next thing I was going to talk about, is that, you know, this initial kind of onslaught of pages and being able to find things and so on and so forth. The one thing that I take a little exception what you said is that, unfortunately, as much as these protocols became the standard, the norm, at the same time they were not exactly identical among all the players, because the main application to display a web page was a web browser, and unfortunately had different camps with different ideas. Microsoft was doing their own thing, as they always do. I mean, they now try to play a little bit better with everybody, but before it was always about Microsoft, and there was nobody else basically as far as they were concerned. So the IE became something with their own extensions, their own capabilities to make things more featureful than the standard HTML and stuff. And they had the front page extensions, they called them, and it was one thing. Netscape, of course, did its own thing, and they came up with the whole concept of JavaScript and dynamic pages from that standpoint. And eventually, unfortunately, they wound up being decimated to the point where they still reemerged as Firefox and everything in the end, but still, basically they were gone. And so you have these things like you have Opera, you have Safari, you have Chrome, you have, Google did their own deal. And so, all these different browsers for people who design websites, it's always a challenge, not as much as it used to be, but certainly it's a challenge to keep everything being cross-browser compatible, as they call it, meaning that the website will look the same. Of course, it never does look exactly the same because of how the browsers draw it. So there's a little bit.
That's one of the changes of expectations that I'm talking about. When we first had this, just having the text turn up and this is a header and this is a new paragraph was enough. But of course, designers started to want pixel perfect positioning. We wanted to use big images and slice and dice things together. And of course, that meant that we misused some of the tools. Look at the table layouts that people used. There was no way to position everything perfectly back then. So what they started to do was to lay everything in a table, and nested tables even, where you can say, okay, well, these cells are going to be padding, and then this cell is going to be the heading, and this cell is going to be the first paragraph. And people would lay out pages in tables to have more control over it. It's not that the browsers were deliberately, trying to... They did try and add their own things, but there was the W3C. We had a consortium. We had an agreed set of standards, but different browsers would try and do their own things beyond that. They would try and compete for more users by, of course, adding new features.
Right, and of course, there was the famous Microsoft lawsuit where the government sued Microsoft for anti-competitive practices and being a monopoly, because the main thing that was on in that lawsuit is the fact that they put their own browser right into the operating system on every computer, pretty much knocking out just about everybody out of competition, and that's pretty much what killed Netscape.
It was even worse than that. If you remember, what it was about was Apple wanted to use the Netscape browser as their default. All Windows machines came with IE as default,
right?
And Apple wanted to use Netscape, and the story is, and according to the court cases of the time, what happened was basically Apple were told, if you don't use IE, if you put Netscape in as the default, there will never be another patch that enables a Word document or an Office document to open on an Apple machine. Mm-hmm. And of course, because all businesses used Word and Microsoft Office as the main application for all documents, that really was a no-go. But that was the part which was going too far.
Yeah. And Bill Gates is saint as he is these days. Certainly wasn't much of a saint back in those days, in terms of these areas anyway. But that's separate deal. So going back again to the web pages, we talked about web pages became more complicated. We had things like people started embedding code, having additional functionality. You had Flash command from Adobe, so you can add some animation. There was a lot of complexity added to the regular old hypertext, regular HTML pages. And this is, of course, the world we live in now. There was cascading style sheets, which we have now, which allow us to do this precise positioning of elements on the screen. And now it even can do animation. There's all kinds of complexities that are part of web development now. But if you go back in terms of from business standpoint and look at these systems I was talking about that were running internally, essentially the web advanced to the point, because part of the problem with the whole web actually having a web application, which is in my personal definition, Ammon may look at it a little differently, is if you take a web site and you add intelligence to it, in other words, it can actually do something more than just a simple display and allow people to click. It can actually react to different actions of the user with different results, and at the same time different functionality based on what the user is doing. Okay, then to me that shows right there, that's intelligence built in to the website, where it's not just always the same thing. Then you have, at that point, you have web application, and web application to me is nothing more than a web-based computer system that used to run locally on some computer inside a company. Now you have the technology be, I mean, technology is advanced enough and fast enough finally, because it certainly wasn't the beginning of the web, to be able to develop same kind of applications with same kind of smarts and same kind of intelligence, to be able to run whatever environment you want to run, no matter how smart you want it to become, actually from your web browser. So that's kind of where we advance to now. And in fact, right now I'm talking to a company that I developed a system using Microsoft Office tools like Ammon was just mentioning some 15 years back. Now I'm talking about rewriting the entire system, even though they've been using it for 15 years, using nothing but web-based approach. So all you really will need to do to be able to run the system is have a phone or have a browser on a tablet or on a desktop, and the whole system will run directly from there. And of course, that's a whole, it's a computer system that's web-based, which is a web application.
Yeah. And one of the things we're looking at, Fanos in the audience has said, can we assume that things will keep changing? Absolutely. Wearable and mobile technology is in its infancy. And yes, you can expect that in the next few years, the internet will be like, OK, Google, or hello Siri, or whatever. You will be able to talk to computers everywhere in the world as naturally as if they were right there with you. The internet will be everywhere with you, and in almost all of the things you interact with. The Internet of Things is coming along at the same time.
Right.
So that I mean, where we're looking at the moment is a refrigerator that can automatically reorder stuff. So it knows when you've just finished using the milk, and by the time you get home, there's another delivery there, or that kind of thing is going on. At the very least, it can be preparing shopping lists, so that when you go to the grocery store, there's your list ready to be plugged into a terminal down there. There's
like the fitness bracelets that people wear. That's not an application right there.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's lots of these things going on. There will get to be a time when, you know, you'll get up in the morning, your wardrobe will suggest what would be good clothes to wear for the day, because it's already got the weather forecast, it knows what the wind chill factor is going to be, and you know, that kind of display will be around. Technology will become a huge part of our life, and the internet is what's going on behind all of that. The website will probably fade more and more into the background. I think there will always be an interface which will be very much like a website, but I think the website itself will start to disappear and the technology will become more pure.
Right. Yeah. Much more useful, much more intuitive, and basically, it's still going to be, you know, technically speaking, a website. It just, the way you look at it, you won't see it that way. To you, it's just something you talk to, you tell it what to do. One of the prime examples of what we're talking about here is Google Now. That's a perfect example of technology where I can just say, okay, Google, and I can say something like, you know, what's the weather like tomorrow in San Francisco, and it'll tell me. And I can then say, is it going to rain? Okay. And what is going to happen is that the thing will come back and tell me that there's not going to be, or there's going to be a certain amount of precipitation in San Francisco. So not only is it intelligent enough to look up and tell me about the weather based on my speech, you know, with my accent and everything, it still does a phenomenal job, in my opinion. But in addition to that, you have the situation with it coming back on the second question. When I ask it, is it going to be windy? It knows, you know, it's smart enough. For us, on the people level, it seems like a very trivial and simplistic thing. Of course, if I asked about the temperature in San Francisco, of course I would mean that I want to know about wind in San Francisco if I don't mention the word San Francisco again. You know, when we talk to each other, we don't specify things like, you know, how are you today, John? And, you know, John, would you like to, you know, look over here, or John this, John that. Unless you're a used car salesman, you just don't use that over and over because John knows he's John. I mean, it's a done deal. But with computers and things that are technology based, it wasn't until very recently they didn't have that level of artificial intelligence to be able to think like we do. One of the great examples, I just saw this movie David Amerland recommended, and excellent movie called Ex Machina. I don't know, Ammon, if you've had a chance to see it yet.
Right,
but it's you have, yeah. So it's a perfect example where they show, fairly near-term future. It's not some future in 100 years from now. We're talking about something that's going to be coming along like within a few years here, where there was this, completely artificial robot, person-like robot designed, that whose prime function was to act and do things like a human being would. So the whole movie is about this test that this genius guy who developed it, to do this test where they call it the Turing Test, where a single person can interact with this machine. It looks like a person, but it's basically a machine, a computer, a robot. And then there's enough intelligence in there to be able to basically have this human indicate that it's just like dealing with another human. I mean, there's nothing necessarily, except for the appearance perhaps, there's really nothing that leaves you thinking that this is some kind of a inferior in terms of intellect entity that you're trying to interact with. So if it acts and if it talks and if it moves like a human, then the test is passed. And I won't spoil for everybody what the movie, how it ends and everything. But this computer actually is, a lot more human than, it's almost scary how human it is.
Yeah.
But all the flaws built in, by the way. It's not just
one would say that about Google. We're already starting to become concerned with how much information it may know about us. The incident, of course, with Snowden made clear that, we're worried about how much technology is already knowing about us. There is a great TV series out at the moment called Humans, which is about artificial intelligence. It's about robots having come along and replaced most of the workforce. That these very human-like robots are around. They're still governed by, the laws of robotics. Asimov has always been pivotal in that. And yet there's one group of actual sentient machines. Fascinating series, but also what it makes us look at, the way it makes us look at what makes us human, what makes us different from machines, what are the differences. Fascinating stuff. But it shows also the level of fear. We do worry that we could be creating something smarter than us. We already know that machines can build machines. We've got automated factories all over the world right now. Machines have been building machines for years. For decades, computers have been designed by computers. The computer chips you're using today were designed by computer programs because they were doing a better job than the people were. So we already know that machines are making or capable of making better machines than we can. So we have a machine. They are replicating. So once they have consciousness, we've created a kind of life form anyway, which is capable of replacing us. We could be pushing ourselves into an evolutionary black hole.
Right. And if you look at it from a standpoint of real life examples, look at the computer IBM designed that beat in chess the world champion. And, that's a perfect example right there where we can get the intelligence even now to the point to exceed human intelligence in some things. But once you get it to the point which is advancing very quickly, where you have the Terminator type situation, and that's it basically. At that point, once they become intelligent and once they become self-sufficient, humans definitely become lower class citizens at that point, because the robots will be able to be faster. They'll be able to be smarter in many ways. They know everything. It's one of the things that sometimes people say, well, all this stuff. I don't know all this stuff. There is tremendous amount of stuff I don't know. I may know some things more about computers and maybe playing drums than other people, but that's about the extent of it. I definitely don't know all this stuff. Nobody does. It doesn't matter who you talk to. But robots could. I mean, that's where you can actually have the machines with access to the internet, access to all this information, and have these incredible artificial intelligence code running them. Kind of example would be, it's not a real example, but it shows kind of a little glimpse in the future, is data from the Star Trek. Is the right perfect example where you have a stronger, smarter, faster, more capable human. He doesn't have the emotion, but he still can do a lot of stuff without the emotion, and he can still make decisions, figure things out, things like that. So that's probably not probably, it's definitely coming. The question about that, and whether we survive the deal or not, I guess that remains to be seen. But it's an interesting concept right there. But let's talk a little bit, bring it back a little bit, Ammon, about the business side of it, and that is in terms of these web applications, which is what near and dear to my heart, and kind of what I do for a living. Is taking business needs and converting them into these systems for people to use, for businesses to use, for their customers to use on their little devices, so on and so forth. Where do you think the level of intelligence and the need for that is moving to, in your estimation, from your perspective?
Where we're headed immediately is Jarvis from Iron Man. This perpetually on-demand servant that can do all of these little tasks that we need doing, but doesn't interfere with our autonomy. It makes us better than we are. That's where we're headed right now, ideally.
Mm-hmm.
Whether we'll hit those targets correctly, whether we'll make some mistakes along the way, and wherever that goes, that's another thing. But we are looking at a connected world. We're looking at making the whole world more connected, and the weakness there will be that as technology gets more and more connected, we will become the weak link. We are only designed to process so much. We will become the anachronism, the thing that can only see what's in front of it and only hold so many concepts in our mind at the same time. We will build this to support us. So the idea is that Wikipedia is always on tap. But will that mean that we'll become less capable in our own memory? If we can't forget things because there's always somebody to remind us, this little voice, this Jarvis kind of there, are we going to become incapable? We already have issues in schools with kids being able to, look up their homework instantly online. What this is going to do to us as people is going to be interesting, but the direction we're headed right now is making things more and more connected, making life even more suited to us. It's what humanity has always done. We're not designed to live in cold climates. Right, well, we can borrow furs. We can take furs off animals and wrap ourselves. Oh, we can build shelters. Okay, it rains a lot here and that could make you ill. Right, we can build roofs. We can, humans adapt and they change the world to fit them. And we are doing that on the grand scale right now. We are changing the information world. We're making the whole world tell us what's going on around us. And yeah, we are getting to the point where a little device in our pocket can tell us almost everything. Google years ago, they've stopped doing this now, but they said that the vision for Google was to be like the mind of God.
Right. Yeah, exactly. The computer, right. But again, you're getting philosophical on me here. That's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to specifically quiz you and ask you about, the use of, from business standpoint, using web-based systems to convert whatever they're doing in terms of their daily operation processes, procedures, whatever they're normally doing, and using their internal systems and opening those up to basically converting them to web-based approach to make it more ubiquitous, where a salesperson can jump into a plane, fly to New York, and log in and do whatever they want to do on their system, something that they couldn't easily do before without, going through more complicated connections and everything else to get into the system, but actually being able to run right there, using some sort of a browser. Number one. Number two, enabling their customers to become much more empowered to be part of the process, because in a lot of different businesses, customers do not do a lot of things because they don't have ability to. But like my little example with the timeshare I was talking about earlier, is that empowered people to be able to get on and do what they need to do on their own, thus not only feeling better about being empowered and about being able to do it in the first place, but also having the company actually save some time. And because of that money, by not having all these receptionists answering reservationists, answering the call to take all these, to have all these conversations, they would have a lot fewer conversations and a lot shorter conversations, because it's already be predetermined. And of course, if you're talking about next step, which is what a lot of companies do now, is you can actually make a reservation online yourself, so you don't even have to pick up the phone, call anybody. So in terms of looking at businesses in general and being able to webify themselves, so to speak, what do you think about that end of it, in terms of, would you recommend businesses move in that direction or not?
They've got no choice. They've got no choice whatsoever. The future right now, we are looking at the internet moving on to apps. That means that semantic data, semantic markup is becoming more important, so that your data can be used by apps, by those things where everyone's getting all of this different stuff connected. If your data isn't going into that system, it may not get used. Just as we used to worry about our pages being indexed in search engines, we start to need our data to be going into other systems, because other systems are going to be, from this point onwards, replacing the web we know, replacing the idea of websites, the idea that that app I've already got that, books hotels, can start to expand and control every aspect of my journey, from getting the taxi to the airport, to sorting out insurance from
Right, but you're talking from consumer standpoint. What about from the business standpoint?
Well, if it's where do you think the business makes its money? If you don't look as a business from the consumer viewpoint, you've got no business.
No, I understand that. That's not what I'm saying.
But yeah, okay, but let me finish.
Okay.
What I'm saying is, if that's what the consumer's doing, you need to be fitting into that ecosystem. It's no good taking a great stand, right, well, we're going to do this, if all your customers are going to be doing something completely different. So having that ability for your data to be picked up, you are looking at that as an absolute essential for the next 5 years. Absolute. No two ways about it. Within 5 years, that shift is going to be becoming very noticeable. I would say that in the next 3 years is when you want to be moving towards fully semantic markup and making sure you're ready for it to be an early mover. After that, you're not an early mover. You're not an early adapter. I think this shift is going to happen very quickly when it does happen. We're starting to see the early parts. Right now, what matters is making sure your customers are informed, but not too informed. We know that, giving people too many choices is bad for them.
Right.
We are sadly going to be looking at dumbing down. Look at the system you created. What was it there for? It was there for people who were too dumb to ring up in the first place and say, what date have you got available? They tried to book 3 things. They made all these plans before they'd even checked it was possible. So what your system did was enable more people who didn't think ahead and think clearly to be able to use it. Usability, great thing. But a lot of the things we build are crutches. They are things to enable those not so good to perform at a better level. And that's exactly where we're going to be going still. We're going to be dumbing things down, making things more accessible. There's always going to be a bleeding edge, but that's always going to be a narrow path. We are certainly moving towards a system where the computers around us are going to be our nannies. They are going to be doing more and more things for us. They are going to be, doing ordering for us. They're going to be making sure we've got our medication. But whose medication are they going to be buying? Whoever moves first with the app, unfortunately.
Right. No, I understand that part. But if you're looking at internal systems, a lot of that stuff you just can't divulge anyway. You don't want to, divulge information to your customers or to your competitors. So you can't just put all the data on the web. That's basically suicide in a lot of cases. So I think it needs to be done. There needs to be a difference. I mean, in my case, yes, it's good to empower people, give them availability so they can make better decisions, and everything works more efficiently. But at the same time, do I want to put my clients list, all the 30,000 people that this company served, online, available to anybody to consume? Heck no. There's no way any company would want to release their client list in a public way like that to anybody else. So there is difference between what kind of data. It's not about sharing all the data on the web and making it semantically findable. It's not like that at all, in my view. I mean, certainly there's
is that the part that's maybe our old thinking? I mean, isn't part of this whole thing about data freedom and about, look, if it serves your customer to know
it
all
does
of
not.
your customers,
how is my
and
publishing?
If your business is the best, you shouldn't have to worry about putting your client list out there because nobody can beat you.
No. I disagree with that. Sorry, I disagree with that. I don't see how
the only clients I don't talk about are the ones that don't want me to talk about it. And the only reason they don't want me to talk about it is they don't want their competitors to know who's handling their SEO or
no, I don't want in my business somebody coming in and pitching their wares to my customers. I just don't want that happening. I mean, and I'm basically giving it to them on a golden plate. After spending years and a bunch of sweat to accumulate this customer list, I'm going to give it away to somebody. I don't think that's a realistic thing for most businesses to do. So that's what I'm saying. There needs to be a segregation of data, and it needs to be developed and put together where, yes, you are giving your customers ability to do what they want to do, and in a way which makes it easier. But at the same time, I mean, there needs to be, anyway, that's I think that's a longer discussion right there, but let's just say we a little bit part on this topic. Well, what I wanted to ask you was, in terms of developing these web applications, from business standpoint, in your opinion, from the marketing standpoint, I mean, let's look at it from a marketing standpoint. Do you think it's important for businesses to start moving their legacy data, some of it at least, that they can publicize, in addition to the actual processes online, meaning on the web, I should say, not online? Does it help them? Well, I know it helps them in terms of marketing, but to what degree? I'm just trying to get your professional opinion from a marketing standpoint, what bringing somebody's business processes to the web would potentially mean to their business from a marketing standpoint.
It's such a general question. It's going to change for every single business. It's going to be very case specific. Let me give a couple of cases and maybe we can work out some different examples from there. So one company years ago was a company that specialized in vinyl. When the CD revolution happened, but they still did vinyl records, and they were mostly for DJs, but for serious aficionados who still say vinyl sounds better. It's just got more character. So they sold vinyl records. Now, when I first came across them, they had a database, but it wasn't actually powering their site. Each day at a certain time, the database would generate a static version of the site. And it was a ridiculous, it was like a 20 megabyte homepage. With this information of all the records they had available. And of course what we did was, well, hang on, you've got the database, you've got a web server, why aren't you serving a dynamic site in the first place? And look at ways of optimizing that and making sure the caching worked to make that a realistic option, so that the site was continually right up to date. Huge advantage to that, as we know, because you're no longer taking orders for things you may have sold out that morning, or having to check at the point of actual sale that you've still got this in stock when you've got to pay for it. If this item isn't around, you can show that in the first place before you've set people's expectations for a fall. So for them, great stuff. Let's look at software as a service. These days, having automated businesses is completely possible. There's lots of ways of doing that. I've always been very interested in the idea of content management system that's got a bit of AI in it, and it rewrites its own content. We see this with Google. Your search results, even searching in the same town for the same thing, will be different to mine. That personalized part is in there. That is something that was completely unbelievable to people 10 years ago. That idea that somebody would be able to process that kind of information fast enough to personalize for each individual, ridiculous. No way. And yet, Google have proved that that's entirely possible. But what
especially
I'd
on
be
that huge
interested in,
scale.
yeah, the page could change according to how you've arrived there. Back in those days when I was first talking about this, there was a big difference between, there was still more than one search engine, but there was a big difference between a Yahoo user and a Google user. Google users tended to like that clean interface. They tended to do a lot more searching. They tended to be more technical. So they liked content that was short and to the point and got there very quickly. Whereas Yahoo users were kind of used to the portal. They liked more information. They kind of needed a bit more security. They liked bigger images and stuff like that as well. As a rule, they wanted to have more reassurance. So having a page that was different if somebody came from a Yahoo referral than if came from a Google referral could actually help you convert. And to this day, you can still use custom URLs to give you that kind of information. I've seen people do this with, of course, AdWords accounts where they're using specific landing pages. Maybe your email campaign lands on a different landing page, but the whole point is your website doesn't need different landing pages if you're just able to, give it a very subtle clue, whether it's looking at the referral request. Unfortunately, that's been deprecated. We're not seeing referrals anymore. We're too worried about misuse to be looking at the positive uses of that. But we can instead tag the links, and just a very small piece of code can tell you exactly what this is, who's likely to be coming from it, and how to adapt one page to suit this user as opposed to that user. So dynamic and intelligent systems are useful. Where it gets more useful is when the site becomes intelligent on its own enough that it's got a set of rules it can do, kind of like A/B testing, and kind of like dynamic split testing, but it can do this on the fly. It can say, okay, I can see that this tag is different to that tag. What content should I show them? Well, why don't I experiment a little and find what works best? And your system could be doing that on the fly, self-optimizing websites.
Right, and that's something that's a little bit, just so people don't get too excited about this concept, is that in the I think it was, I don't remember, I think it was the second show that Ammon did with Vincent Messina on marketing. They talked about websites. Maybe it was the third one, I'm not sure, but they talked about the fact that there's all kinds of different. The fourth one, okay, yeah. Sorry, the fourth one. They talked about the fact that there's different pricing. There's different pricing levels and stuff, and that's one of the things to remember, that the websites themselves, if you're talking brochureware, that's fairly inexpensive, and depending how much and depending what kind of people you get involved with. If you're involved with other people, then that whole thing with brochureware doesn't have to cost an arm and a leg. I mean, it's not that expensive to do. It all depends on the kind of graphics talent you hire, unless you do your own graphics. It depends on how fancy you want the site to look. It depends on how many pages you have, but it's not that expensive. But when you get into this web application area, where you start putting in smarts, especially smarts like Ammon just described, where you're actually building pages on the fly that are specific to certain criteria based on the people who arrive, based on the person who's currently looking at the page, not people, but even each individual person, and then potentially showing them results that match either their desired outcome, whatever they're interested in, particular areas of your website, particular categories, let's say, and you have 150 of them, and they're only interested in 3 based on their prior experience. So the site needs to track all the stuff, what they've done before on your website, what kind of things they clicked on, and then so as you pull up the page, you actually show the page based on that information that you stored somewhere before, and you're tracking it as they're doing it now. So in other words, it's a lot more complicated. It's a lot involved in programming, and thus it winds up costing quite a bit more money, potentially having people updating your website or your web application in this case on a continuous basis. I mean, just like businesses evolve all the time, everything else needs to evolve around them. You can't just build the site and you're done. I mean, it doesn't work like that. You can do it with a brochure. You can't do it with an intelligent website. And so the cost can escalate anywhere from you're paying a few $100 to get a single page up that just shows your name and address and phone number and basically what you do, all the way to multiple tens of thousands of dollars or even more so, just like regular software where you're talking, I'm sure you probably heard about enterprise software costing $500,000. I mean, you can easily move into the same realm depending on your needs or your desires, I should say, not so much needs. Well, and your needs as well. And so it has to do really in talking to the right people. Plus, you have some people that are ethical and some people that are not so ethical, and it's not just with marketers, by the way. The Ammon was mentioning that in one of the hangouts about the fact that there were marketers that were not exactly ethical, and of course there's plenty of marketers that are extremely ethical and very good to work with. Well, the same goes for the web designers. And one of the things that I'd like to caution you if you're in business in terms of web designer people is you usually have a disconnect between different areas of expertise. So when you have a web designer, that typically means it's a person who can design graphics well. They can design page layout well. They don't necessarily know how to do computer programming and logic at all. Okay, they may know it somewhat, but they may most likely, if you take a really good graphic designer, they're not a programmer. 99% of the time. So what you have is if you're trying to build a website with some intelligence in it, then you have missing piece. You got this guy that designs this, oh my God, I can't believe this looks so good, pages, but at the same time, they don't do anything meaningful in terms of functionality, in terms of what people really need to, in terms of what they need to use and how they should be using it. And when I say that, when you design websites for your business, don't ever design them yourself, okay? Let me repeat that. The website you're building is not for you. The website you're building is for your audience, okay? So a lot of business people that I deal with myself, they fall into this category where they need to be part of the design. And so you have a complete disconnect. I'd like this red to be a little bit redder. I like this particular logo to be a little bit 2 pixels to the left. You get into these kind of conversations, it's a waste of time, it's a waste of money. It's not the way to do it, okay? What you're looking for is you're looking to look at your customer, your end audience, your target audience, basically, who you're trying to get this particular site to be visible and used by, and then you design it based on what they need and want, which in a lot of cases winds up being catch-22, because if you're building something new, you don't have any idea, especially new business, you don't have any idea what they want. You have some ideas what you think they might want, but you don't know exactly 100% what they want. So in that case, what you should do is you should put together a website based on your best guesstimates of what it should be, and then you go out to the people and you track what they're doing, you ask them questions, and you adjust the website based on their feedback, potentially scrubbing it and redoing it completely to match what they want and what they need. That would be the prudent way to do it. So that's number one. Number two, when you get people involved, and there's nothing wrong with that, you need to involve people, professionals. Like, for example, if I was going to do a professional marketing campaign for my business, I would be silly, no matter how many books I read, to just do it on my own. I would go out and hire somebody like Ammon that have done this and know exactly what they're doing in that realm to do my marketing campaign, because my strong points is system design and development, and he is the marketing guy. So you want to bring people in who have expertise in each area. In this case, you have a web designer doing the visuals, and then you have somebody who is good at both programming and systems design to do the functional part. When you synergize the two, now you have something going. And if the website is going to have a lot of marketing expertise, you bring your marketing people to be part of the mix. So in other words, it's a common sense thing. You use people who have experience and skills to make what you're looking for done. Okay? Ammon, any comments there?
That's a really good point. I mean, when people have been trying to work out what the web is, and this is still going on today, we are still defining what the web is. Early on, it was, okay, well, we can make pages, so it's like print. And then it was kind of, well, it's on a screen, so it's like television, and it's all about the eyeballs. And what we're doing is missing the point. What defines the internet is that it runs on computers. So what it is more than anything else is intelligent. That's okay, artificially intelligent. It's more about observation and retention of data than anything else right now. But we're on the cusp of that changing. So where you used to have, you've got a website and that passes leads to your sales team, and then they fill it in, into their customer relations database, and somewhere else it's going into the account database. We want to connect all of that up so that the website is able to know which customers end up as the top rated in your CRM, in your customer relations management. Which are the customers who end up sending the most other customers? Who are sending the most referrals? And they're making that data all play back, making our business more intelligent. There's a classic example of intelligence that we see time and time again in the media, and it's Sherlock Holmes. And what makes Sherlock Holmes so brilliant isn't that he's doing something absolutely magical. He's spotting the little things that we could see but don't. That's what computers are really good at. They're great at spotting those little details because computers don't miss anything. They don't ignore anything they're trained to see in the first place. And they can be trained to see everything. So the smallest little detail, they are able to notice. People who go to this page and then this page tend to be worth 10% more than people who don't. Tiny little details like that can be picked up by a computer in ways that only Sherlock Holmes would notice in real life. But it's making you able to be as intelligent as Sherlock Holmes. That's what your computer systems can be doing. The internet is about connecting all of those different systems together so that that data is more useful, so that you can see that what you've tracked over there actually influences what happens over there. But at the moment, as long as you're not exchanging data between them, as long as you're not passing all of that data, there's no way you can make that correlation. There's no way you can spot that trend. So we are looking at integrating systems more and more to empower us with more intelligence. And then to go back to the earlier audience question, our part is to provide the wisdom. And I once heard it described that intelligence is what tells you by looking around, it's going to rain today. Wisdom is what tells you to take a damn umbrella with you. So,
Right. Exactly.
what to do about it is wisdom. We will still be the wisdom part. Intelligence, the systems will be noticing things that are going on and making suggestions, but the decisions are going to be down to us.
Yeah, and this is speaking of Sherlock Holmes, is like you said, it's all he's noticing things, but to take it one step afterwards, just noticing is not good enough, because we notice a lot of stuff too. It's the deductive reasoning that he does afterwards with what he notices. So you look at something and then you make some kind of, if this, then this is what's going to happen, or this is the decision that's made. So the deductive reasoning part is exactly what I was talking about writing the intelligence into these applications, computer applications, for the business use, to specifically look at all these things and then have the rules in place, which is programming, to be able to tell, to do this deductive reasoning to figure out what to do with this based on this. And this is nothing more than a lot of different nested if and else type statements. Now it's if this is the case and this is the case or this is the case, then this means this. And so, of course, you continuously increase the number of rules, continuously make it more complicated. But this is kind of how our brains work as well. If you think about it, we don't pay much attention to it, but that's essentially what we do. We constantly ask a lot of if questions, and based on those answers, our own answers, we determine our next basically avenue. We're going to be going to, if the kids say they want to have a lot of fun, then that means that we probably should take them on vacation to Disneyland, because that will give them a lot of fun. So there is the if and there is the else type of situation. Else would be, if we're so tired that fun right now is out of the question, we better lay somewhere on the beach for a week. So that's kind of a situation where you move things around accordingly. And so this is the important part here, is about developing these. And for small businesses, I know a lot of people would say something, okay, this is wonderful. What you're saying is great. What Ammon is saying is wonderful. That's peachy for somebody who has 10,000 employees, has their own marketing department, has their own IT department, blah, blah, blah. I'm a guy. I have one more person working for me, or it's me and my wife, or me and myself. there's no way I can afford to write a system that would be this intelligent to track everything, come up with custom pages. It's just too expensive. And so the answer to that question is yes, you're right. It is too expensive for you. But there's still, if you do, one of the things that Ammon was talking with Vincent was about marketing. The first thing they talked about was strategy. You need to come up with a strategy before you start, generating all these marketing materials and going gung ho for whoever you can talk to and things like that. Strategy to come up with a game plan and the budget and the realistic expectations of what you're trying to achieve, and then you basically execute and act on it. It's the same thing with building IT systems, building computer systems for businesses, exactly the same thing. If you sit down and strategize what you would like to do, or and at the same time what you can do in terms of budget and so on and so forth, there's still things you can do better than what you're doing right now, especially if you're not running any web-based systems or have decent websites or anything like that. You can definitely do a lot of stuff. You don't necessarily need to spend a lot of money. And at the same time, it's also a building process where I know myself, I don't know how other people do it myself. I look at the system I wrote for this resort company, a couple of companies in Idaho, and it literally scares me when I look at the system right now in terms of how many tables it's using, in terms of how many reports it pumps out, how many queries it has. It's scary for me to look at. And I'm the person who designed the whole thing from scratch, built the whole thing from scratch, and have been supporting it all these years on my own. So how do you make this happen? The answer is really simple. You start with something small, something that's manageable, and you start doing a little bit more and more and more as the needs arise and as desires arise for what it should do. And that's how you build potentially a monster out of a tiny thing at first. And it works fine. I mean, they've been using it for all these years, and that's the thing to do with the web stuff. Is if you strategize, you sit down with somebody who knows what they're doing, and come up. And it needs to be a synergy. When I said that don't be a web designer, I don't mean that you don't participate, because one of the other problems that a lot of people have with web design and web applications is that the web people, like I said, the web designers don't know programming most of the time. The programmers are horrible at designing visual stuff. Myself here included. Don't ask me to design some kind of graphical layout for you, even though I mess with graphics all the time. And people, some people at least love my pictures. Believe me, I cannot sit down and design something graphical from scratch that would be a professional graphic design. I can't. So you have some people do this, other people do that. But at the same time, no matter how many people you get, marketing people, you got sales people, you got all these people in the mix, they don't know your business like you do. And so because you know best, because every business is different. It doesn't matter if it's, same kind of category as, million other people. Every single business is somewhat different. And you, being the owner of the business, is the only one who actually has all the details in terms of how you want to run it, in terms of what you want to accomplish, things like that. So the name of the game here is to synergize the two entities, take all the pros for what you need, web designers, programmers, marketing people, whoever you need, and then synergize that with your vision and your view of where you're trying to go, because it is your business, and that's how you make the best result. What do you think, Ammon?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what I've seen a lot of people doing is, they build their business and then they automate all of the things that have been taking a lot of time. So, if you start off with a website that takes email orders, the next thing is that you instead put a form in there that processes the orders and reduces the work that way and passes it straight away to the next person. You might automate as much of the customer service as possible by having FAQs and autoresponders that respond to certain questions and help refine that, a ticketing system. You can build up levels of automation over time that each free you up to do more things, which might be start a second business, or it might be to focus more on developing new business and bringing more money in. So yeah, you can scale these things up. The other way, of course, is all resources in business, apart from your strategy, are flexible. Look, the budget you've got is the budget you decide to have. That, again, is a strategy. If I need more money to start a business, all I've got to do is come up with a plan that inspires somebody who's got more money to come in with me and invest, or that gets a bank loan. So every single resource is yours to manage according to your strategy. The strategy is the only part that's fixed. Everything else is fluid, including your budget, including your time. Everything is up to you to manage if you've got the strategy and vision to be able to do something. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody needs to run out and get financing. That's a scary step for some people, but understand that it's a possible one and that not doing it is a decision. It's not a bad decision, it's a decision. So whether you need extra finances, whether you want to, come up with a great automated site up front, well, if you've got the business case for it and that makes sense, you can borrow the finance to do that. There's no question. People will invest if this is going to make your business worth 10 times as much. People will invest in order to get half of it, and you're still 5 times better off than you would have been by not having it.
Okay, excellent. Well, definitely worth applause there. So in the end here, we'll do a quick, selfless, shameless, whatever they want to call it, promotion. So Ammon, I'm going to start with you. Please mention where people can find you, how they can hire you, and how they can benefit from your services.
Well, internet marketing is my general thing. I'm especially known for search engine marketing, but if you've got a business online and you are believing it has more potential than you're currently getting from it, get in touch. We'll see what we can do. You can find me at ammonjohns.com, or pretty much type my name into any search engine. Get in contact however suits you.
Great. And then I'm assuming that goes true because we are all connected and we are all online, there's no boundaries, basically. You can do it for anybody in any country. That's not a limitation, right? You can easily help anybody in the States just as much as you can help somebody in the UK.
Exactly. The only limitation really is language. I speak English and I can JavaScript, but other than that, English is my main language. So that's really it.
Perfect. Same limitation here in terms of English. I mean, I could do Russian, but I don't know anything in terms of technical stuff in Russian, so English would be best. And you can find me on Google+. You can find me on my website. That's right there on the right side. And I do custom systems, business systems, basically, in terms of designing and programming them. And I concentrate on web-based because I think that's the best platform these days to do it. I also do consulting in terms of teaching people how to properly use Google Apps. That's my favorite suite of tools for small businesses, because there's a tremendous amount of opportunity to both save time and money and accomplish a lot of things much more effectively than many small businesses currently do. So that's kind of main things that we do. One last thing is I just started this new initiative called Spec Zone, which is part of my strictly productive and efficient computing initiative they started a long time ago. And that's basically essentially a way for you to get an IT department of your own run by me on a limited time, but consistently on a weekly basis every week, where we tackle all the different things, do some design, do some development, talk about what should be bought, how you can save some money. In other words, exactly the same idea as if you had your own IT people and you just open the door and say, hey, Oleg, I have this new marketing or sales campaign we're trying to do. We need to track it. We're thinking about doing some advertising on AdWords, blah, blah, blah. Help us make it happen. And so this is the kind of stuff that I do in terms of consulting and training. And so if you don't have your own IT department, you're a single person business, for as little as $200 a month, you can have your own IT department. So that's that for shameless plugs. And I want to thank very much Ammon Johns for his immense and never-ending wisdom. And Ammon, if you have a few last words, we'll finish with that.
Only thanks for joining us, and thanks for having me. Take care.
Pleasure.